My name is Alexis Rogers, and I'm the Customer Relationship Lead here at RightCapital. And I want to welcome you to our webinar today on boosting client engagement. As we know, especially in this ever-changing landscape that is ever more present in terms of engaging with technology, especially with clients in the financial realm, today we're going to be walking through all the different ways that you can leverage RightCapital to further enhance your relationships. And of course, a key aspect of that is the ability to customize the client experience in RightCapital, and of course, adapt it to any point in your relationship is going to be the key theme of what we're going to be talking about today. So today we're going to be highlighting all the different ways that you can customize the client experience, especially as your relationships with the client themselves develop, their needs develop in terms of what you might be addressing with them. So we're going to highlight how you can customize that to reflect that need for change and that further step in your relationship potentially with a client. We're going to walk through some of the different ways that you can directly engage a client into RightCapital, walking through how to invite the client, and also if we do choose to engage them directly in RightCapital, how we can also leverage tasks to further enhance client engagement directly in the system. We're also going to walk through how there can be a little bit of a stronger client communication process in place with the notes features that we have, and how you can also use it for your own internal records. We're also going to walk through some of the key interactive client visualizations that can assist in painting the picture for a client and just to serve as that easy to digest space for a client to make changes if desired, or just to view their plans and your proposals. We're also going to highlight, of course, as always with RightCapital, all of the different resources that you have available to you when leveraging our tools. One of those resources being that during this webinar, if you have any questions, you can feel free to use the questions drop down to type out your questions there. More than happy to answer any questions you might have. We'll be answering them more towards the end of the presentation, but please don't hesitate to type the question out while the presentation is happening live. Shifting gears into RightCapital. When we first log into RightCapital, we're going to be brought to our advisor dashboard. Here in our advisor dashboard, we are going to see our clients list. Before we dive into the customization features for a client, it's important to note some of the different client-facing aspects that, especially as we choose to invite a client into RightCapital, that we can use to customize and brand their experience. Going into the gear icon in the upper right-hand corner and under Account, this is where we're going to find our profile page. Here under Profile, this is where we're going to, of course, have set up our information. If we haven't already done so, we can just take a second to fill out this information, as this is what displays directly on cover pages of reports. But the key aspect here, in particular, as we're talking about inviting a client to RightCapital, is going to be that customized experience that you can start to tailor to your client needs. And that can be found under the Customization tab. Here under Customization, this is where we can start to create our own branding experience. And especially if we choose to invite clients to RightCapital, when they log in, they would see your logo and your color theme. And so if you wanted to make that adjustment or needed to make that adjustment, it can be done here by just clicking on the Update button for the logo. From here, we can choose to drag and drop a file directly from our computer. We can pick a file from our computer or upload a file from one of these various sources. We can also set the color theme in RightCapital by just clicking into the field right here, and we can either type out the hex code, which is what this random string of numbers and letters represents. But if we don't have that, it's perfectly fine. We can just click on the hashtag directly to the left, which will open up a color wheel in which we can start to fine tune what we have selected for our color theme. And we can continue to do the same thing with a secondary color. We can use the color wheel if needed, but you do have another tool available, which is this color picker tool. So we can select a color on our screen via the color selector tool. So especially if maybe we did upload our logo and we wanted to use that branded color, like RightCapital's blue, we can just make that selection from here. And you'll notice that as we do make adjustments to the color theme, that we are seeing the client preview down below also adjusting. This is going to be a preview of what it would look like if we do choose to save this as our color theme. This is going to be relevant for if we are engaging clients into RightCapital especially, but also for your own experience, whether you're presenting directly in RightCapital or just navigating throughout the system. And if we like what we have selected, we can hit the Save button, and that'll be leveraged as our color theme. And we can always hit the Reset button if we wanted to go back to the RightCapital default of white and beige. As we're going to talk about the process of inviting a client and customizing their experience, it's important to note the different invitation emails that a client might receive and how you can customize this if desired. So down below at the bottom of this page, we're going to find our invitation email template. From here, there's going to be two different options for invitation email templates. The first one is going to be the email that is sent to clients where the data entry process has been completed. The second one is going to be the email sent to clients who can still access the data entry template and has not been completed. So when we first create the client plan, we're brought to that initial 6 steps of data entry, which is highlighting and just holding our hands through entering that current plan. If we already hit the complete button and we can see the full modules of RightCapital in that client plan, that means that they're out of the data entry process and they're going to receive the first template. If they are still within that data entry process, we can still see those highlighted and honed 6 steps of data entry. They're going to receive the secondary email. We can customize what this email says, including the email subject, the email title, and also the button caption. So this is going to be the button. Right now we have it set to sign up. So when they open up the email, when we do invite them in a couple seconds, it's going to appear to say sign up, but you can also customize that text. The same thing with the content for the invitation itself. So for the ones that are still in the data entry process, that email might look a little bit different than the ones that are out of that data entry process, and we're just inviting them further down the line in your relationship with them. You can make that customization to each of the content of these emails. You can also include any links that might be relevant as well, but there is that default that is already pre-filled for you, but you can certainly make that adjustment if needed. Once we have that set up to our liking, and now we have that branded experience and that customized experience from the get-go for the client, let's go over to our clients page where we can start to walk through the process of inviting the client. So today we're going to be working on the Sherlock Holmes family plan. And so let's say we wanted to invite the Holmes family. We would then search for them from the client list. We'd go to the client access tab, and this is where we can enter the email address for the client and or the co-client. Once we're ready and we have that email entered, we can then hit the invite button, and that would send the invitation email that we just curated in the invitation email template page to invite them to sign up for RightCapital. You do have the option from the drop down though, from this little downward arrow when you enter an email address, to choose to just copy a direct sign up link. So maybe if you're in the client meeting with them and you wanted to just give them the link right away, you can also just provide that as well instead of sending the invitation email itself. One of the key things when it comes to client relationships is the customizability and flexibility to decide how your clients interact with RightCapital. Within the client access tabs and planning access tabs, this is where you can define what the client can view and what they can interact with in RightCapital. It's important to note that as we are highlighting how you can adjust this, that you can fully control this and make changes to the selections at any point in time in your relationship with them and when they've been invited to RightCapital. So for example, starting with the client access tab, this is where we indicate what the client can interact with the next time they log into RightCapital. The first thing we can change and specify is going to be how we want our client to interact with the profile items. This is going to be whether the client can make changes to things like their salary, their income, their other goals or expenses, or if we want them to have a view-only experience and not be able to make changes to the profile. The next thing that they can adjust is going to be the action items. The action items are what we use to curate our proposed plans or our what-if scenarios. For example, the third setting is going to be the option to have a client be able to try out and save different action items, meaning that they can see what it looks like if they retire early, and that will be saved as part of their proposed plan. The middlemost option is going to be that the client can try out different action items, but the changes will not be saved. What this means is that when the client logs in next, they can go to the action items, propose to see what it looks like if they retire early, see those impacts to their plan, their probability of success, for example. But as soon as they log out, it would revert back to whatever you have indicated for your proposed plan. And then finally, there is the option to have the client not be able to make changes to the action items at all and have a totally review-only experience. The next thing that can be adjusted is going to be under the Planning Access tab. Here under Planning Access, this is where we indicate what the client can view the next time they log into RightCapital. So like I said, you can make adjustments to these selections at any point in time. If we have them invited and we check off a couple of these modules, the next time they logged in, they would see whatever we have selected at that point in time. So from here, we can choose to include as much as we want or as little as we want. We can always come back and make more changes and add more as needed and as the client relationship progresses in terms of their needs. But let's say for this client example, we're going to be looking at highlighting the profile to start with. They have some debt, so we're going to include that. We're going to include the entirety of the dashboard and the asset allocation. And you'll notice that there are a couple things that are underlined, such as analysis and cash flows within the retirement tab. Anytime we see something underlined in RightCapital, that's going to be a key indicator that we can click into it to see additional functionality. For the Planning Access tab, this means that we can be further selective and further refine what the client can view on the individual sub-tab level for this module. So with the analysis, if we're trying to have a very targeted experience for the client in terms of what they see here, maybe we want to focus on just these couple selections. Same thing with the cash flows. Maybe we just want to highlight the maps and that key visual that we're going to highlight later, and the accounts tab. We can make those selections as well. And as we hit save, the next time the client logs in, they're going to see exactly that. You do also have the option to view the preview of what the client would view when they log in next by just clicking on the downward arrow right here and selecting Open in Client Access Mode. When we open in Client Access Mode, we can see exactly what we had selected, starting with the dashboard snapshot. We can see what it looks like for each of the different modules in those sub-tab selections, very, very targeted and intentional in their interactions with RightCapital from here. This is also often utilized for client presentation modes as well. But for now, we're going to be focusing on it as that preview of what the client can see when they log in. Another key thing that can be accomplished within the Planning Access tabs is that especially if you wanted to have a particular flow to the way the client interacts with RightCapital and particular needs that you wanted to address as the first thing that they see when they log in, you do have the opportunity to reorder the flow and the ordering of the tabs that we see. So for example, if we wanted to talk about profile first, we wanted that to be the first thing that the client sees when they log in. The same thing for us as advisors. We can just drag and drop the header of profile to the top. Maybe we also want to talk about investment module second, and then we want to have the discussion about some of the dashboard features. We can also reorder the sub tabs as needed. So if we want to talk about tasks first and dashboard, we can make that adjustment. Same thing with any of these headers that we can click into. We can also reorder what we view here in terms of these other selections. And just for a bit of a preview of what that looks like, we can always hit that downward arrow and choose to open in Client Access Mode to see that very, very different experience when navigating now throughout the software. When the client logs in, they're going to see essentially exactly this, starting with profile net worth, and then that more guided experience. So you can really set the tone of what they see when navigating throughout the software. But now that we walked through the process of how you can customize the client experience and invite them, we're going to walk through some of the ways that you can have further and boost further client engagement directly in RightCapital. So just opening up the client plan, one of the key pieces in RightCapital in terms of client engagement is going to revolve around the tasks feature. So in the Homes family, if we go to the dashboard section, we can find our tasks feature. Here under dashboard tasks, this might be the first thing that you might see when you open up the client plan yourself if you haven't made adjustments to the ordering. Dashboard tasks is where we can start to boost client engagement and where we can start to assign tasks to the client, the co-client, or ourselves. So let's start to do so by clicking on the Add Task button. From this dropdown, we can choose to add a single task, or if we have a task template already pre-built for us, we can also create that in the advisor portal, but also assign it directly from here as well. For now, though, we're going to walk through assigning a single task. From here, we indicate the due date for this task. Right now, it's set for a month from now. We can also assign the frequency, whether this should be a recurring task. It's going to be a monthly task, quarterly, semi-annual, or annual, or just a one-time task, for example. Let's say this is going to be our monthly task. And then we would just choose who we're going to assign this to, whether it's the client or co-client or ourselves as the advisors. In this case, it's going to be the client and co-client. So we're going to select them from the list. And then we can mark the priority of this task, whether it's high priority, low priority, or if there's no particular priority. And then you also have the option to mark this as whether or not this should be visible to the client or not shared with the client. If this is going to be an internally facing task for maybe ourselves as advisors, we can mark this as not shared with the client. What this means is when the client logs in and accesses the tasks module, if we have them granted access to this, they would not see this task. But this is going to be client facing, so we're going to keep that marked as shared with client. And this is going to be our monthly task to review the profile net worth and make any adjustments as needed. So we can add that. And as we start to add tasks, this is going to open up the board view of the tasks. We're also going to walk through just adding a task template as well. So if we wanted to also include just one of the starting the year off RightCapital checklist that I have curated, we can hit the save button and incorporate that particular template right here. And this is going to be including all of these new tasks that are going to be assigned to client and co-client. We have a couple for yourself as the advisor. When it comes to managing tasks, when we're in the client portal, this is going to be focusing on just this client's tasks and their selections. This is where we can also manage their existing tasks or assign those new tasks as needed. When we have tasks assigned, we're going to see a couple headers here in terms of tasks that are marked as overdue, due this week, due in the general future, and tasks that are marked as completed. You do have another layout that you can select for here for your ease, and the same thing for client ease in terms of what they prefer for task organization. So we can just click on the table view to board view selection, and this is just going to be a different layout to the tasks themselves. And then we can also view completed tasks if needed. But for now, we're going to be focusing on the board view versus table view. To manage some of these existing tasks, so let's say, for example, we've already completed the data entry process for this, so we're going to just check off this particular task. We can then mark this as completed, and that'll then bring it to the completed section for us. You'll notice that as we check off a particular task, you'll also have the option to delete them or cancel whatever adjustment we're going to make, but we can also check off multiple and complete them all at once. And now we can view that list that is growing for completed tasks. You also have the option to drag and drop the future tasks or ones that are upcoming or overdue to the completed fields for efficiency as well. And so this is a great space to just also check in. So especially if we've engaged the client over a longer period of time, we have a plethora of completed tasks to see what the progress has been in terms of those completed tasks. So we can see what that looks like for the client. We can click to see more if we have a multitude of tasks assigned and to view that particular list. But this is a great way to have that client engagement. It's also a great way to assign maybe a task for yourself as a reminder of maybe checking in on the client plan. When it comes to creating task templates, that's going to be done by going back to your advisor portal. and you'll find your tasks module. From here, this is where we're going to be able to manage tasks at the advisor level. And also you can add tasks directly from here across your clients if needed. But we can also create templates under the templates selection over here. Under the templates header, we're going to walk through a couple ways you can create templates, including the tasks to start with. So under templates tasks, if we have a series of tasks that we typically will see as part of the process for client engagement, maybe starting with onboarding a client directly in RightCapital for the starting the year off right checklist, for example, anything along those lines that you might be having a series of tasks that are going to be relevant for a client plan, or as you start to invite clients, we can create a template from here. So we can click on the add template button, and then we can start to add tasks to customize the template. And the data entry here is going to be similar to what we just reviewed in terms of adding that task. This is also where you can manage those existing templates. So if we wanted to modify any of these existing templates, we can select it from the list. We can then retitle it as needed. So if this is not going to be this title anymore, this is going to be our secondary check-in of the year. We can make that adjustment, hit the check mark to save the title change. We can also delete these existing templates if needed, and also remove any non-relevant tasks as well. But this is a space where we can start to streamline a little bit of our workflows in RightCapital, especially if we're looking to leverage tasks for client engagement, or maybe for our internal processes in terms of having those tasks assigned to yourself. You'll also find under templates a couple other different templates that you can curate or manage to streamline your other workflows. And that includes the planning access selections. So as we reviewed earlier, when you are inviting a client to RightCapital, you can also curate those planning access templates by just clicking on the add template button. From here, we can retitle the header or the title of this planning access template by clicking on the pencil icon, hitting the check mark to save the name change. From there, we can also make our selections that we would like to see for this particular template. This includes also reordering the flow of what we have for the planning access selections. So this can be just another way to alleviate what you might be doing repeatedly when you're inviting a client in terms of maybe the first step of inviting them and that first relationship aspect. And then maybe as your relationship progresses, your selections and what they can access might be changing. So this is a way to streamline that particular workflow. You can also apply this template across multiple clients by clicking on the apply template button. From there, we can then choose to apply this to all clients or to existing client groups or to individual clients that we have from our client list. That's just another way to streamline that particular workflow. You will notice though that when we are accessing an individual client in their planning access tab, that you do have the option to quickly toggle to one of the existing templates by just clicking on the select template drop down. From here, we can select one of those existing templates. And when we do so, that's going to be reordering the flow of what we have selected. So just another way to streamline that workflow. We can also see that client to advisor engagement in terms of tasks. Another key thing that is important when navigating throughout the software is also the ability to have that open line of communication with the client if desired. So tasks is a great way to have client engagement, to assign tasks, or just to check in with the client. Could also include links there. So if you needed to have that calendar link to book some time, you can also have that be assigned as a task. But another key thing is just having that open line of communication as the client's navigating throughout the system. So especially, for example, if we're looking at maybe our proposed plan. So if we just go to our retirement module and into analysis, this is where we'll see that probability success, which is going to be one of the first gauges of financial well-being. And it's going to be looking at those 1,000 trials of market volatility, also referred to as the Monte Carlo simulations. And it's the percentage of those trials that make it to the end of plan without running out of money. So this is where we can go to lead a lot of different discussions in terms of answering some of those questions that a client might be having. There's a multitude of paths a client might take. The action items are where we start to curate our proposal and make adjustments in terms of what we want to see for our proposed plan, we can do so just for reference by just using these sliders over here or typing into the field to make those adjustments. So if we wanted to indicate, for example, that they save more, we can use that slider, make that change. Once we hit the refresh button, we'll then see the impact of that change to their probability of success. So for example, one of their goals is to retire earlier. So we're working on that particular proposal. And maybe we're also trying to paint the picture of what we're talking about with the client. When navigating throughout the different modules of RightCapital, throughout each of those different fields, same thing with profile as well, you will notice the opportunity to add notes. If we click on the notes button, this is where we can start to have that open line of communication with the client via the notes. If we click on the add note button, from here, we can start to add that client facing note as needed. So we want to talk about, and maybe this is going to be when we do have that client conversation, talk about our needs when retiring earlier. So if we needed more information, we can have that note here, but we can also maybe leave a note here in terms of what we're going to be changing in our particular plan. So we can make that little note here. And this is going to be relevant, especially if we have the client invited to access the retirement analysis. So especially if we wanted to paint the picture for the client and maybe have that little bit of the more personal touch from your relationship standpoint, you can add that note so that way when the client's clicking through the modules and what you have indicated via the planning access tab, that they can see your client facing notes at the bottom of this particular module or any module in which you leave notes. And that can provide that context to provide that idea of what we're evaluating here. It can be used for a multitude of different purposes. Another purpose of the notes themselves is that you can also add a note that is purely internally facing. To do so, we can just click on the Add Notes button. We can then mark this note as not shared with the client via the eye icon. And from here, we can have that just purely internally facing note, whether we wanted to note that we review this at a certain time. Maybe it's just some key things that we want to keep in mind when curating our proposals or anything along those lines. So we're going to note that we're going to review this on May 10th. Just for our internal note to keep that in the back of our heads. Maybe we want to also make an adjustment and assign a task to ourselves to modify this before May 10th. But it's just a great way in terms of having that internally facing note. And when the client's navigating throughout the software, if we've invited them to this particular selection, they will not see that internally facing note or the one that's marked not shared with the client. The same thing is true though if we have a PDF report and if we download a PDF report of the retirement analysis, for example, that will not include any notes that are marked as not client facing. So if they're not shared with the client, we will not have those visible there either. Especially as we see when we're looking at the client plan itself, there's a multitude of different modules available within RightCapital, and there's a multitude of different profile account entries that you can make, that you can all have notes in each. Within this client plan, you will have the option for a notes management station by just going to the three dots in the upper right-hand corner and going into notes. Here under notes, this is where you can see all of the notes that you have across the plan and throughout all the different modules for this client plan. It's also where you can manage these existing ones in terms of if you needed to modify it, especially if you're looking to we're talking about maybe inviting them tomorrow. We want to make sure that all the notes are relevant, or if we needed to make adjustments to them, or just to see before we download a PDF report, what notes we do have throughout the system. We can see that here under plan notes. We can click into any of these existing ones and make adjustments to the particular text itself. We can also mark this as not shared with the client from here as well. And we can also delete them. So if we wanted to remove any of these existing notes, for example, in the profile section, we have that note for retirement age that we're evaluating retiring early in our proposal. We can remove that if it's not relevant. In this case, it is relevant and tying into our proposal, so we're going to leave that as is. Within the notes management station though, you'll also find a space for advisor notes. This is purely for your records, and this is a private note station where you can leave notes for yourself in this client record in terms of maybe spending habits or any key insights that you might want to leave for yourself in terms of what maybe you discussed or just something to keep in mind when looking at this client plan. So for them, they do have a spending habit of going out to eat too much. So we're going to be evaluating that. We wanted to leave that key insight. It can be commonly utilized for a multitude of different things, but this is purely up to what you wanted to leverage and what notes you need to leave in the client record. Each client plan will have their own advisor note station where you can leave your individual private notes unique to that client plan as needed. Which is going to bring us to one of the next kind of client-facing aspects of when we do engage clients in RightCapital. Some of the different modules of RightCapital have a lot of different information in them, but there's a lot of key interactive visuals that can be client-facing that can assist in painting the picture for a client plan. So actually starting in the profile section and under blueprint, here under profile blueprint is where we're going to see one of the first easy to digest visuals that can be an interactive space for a client, especially if we have them invited to RightCapital. The blueprint module is going to be focusing on the current plan, and it can be that great key visual of all of that initial 6 steps of data entry, and also to make adjustments to the current plan as needed. Starting with the net worth, for example, all the way to goals, to income, savings, and expenses. Of course, what the client can interact with here in the profile is dependent upon our selections in terms of what they can access and what they can make changes to. But the blueprint can also just be that space to check in and to just see that nice visual in terms of what our net worth is, who owns what. If we needed to make adjustments to any of these existing accounts, though, the key interactive piece here is that we can click into any of these to make adjustments as needed. So for example, if we needed to make an adjustment to the brokerage account, we can just click on that card, make the adjustments to the total balance, hit save, and that's now incorporated as part of their plan. So it's a great way to have that nice, easy to navigate interactive space for the client. Same thing under goals, where we can see that life map for the goals of the client plan, starting with that vacation goal next year. We have their child's college goal coming up. We have them retiring in our current plan at 67 and 70 respectively. And we have some of those other key expenses as well, or goals. And under income, savings, and expenses, we can see that summary in terms of current income, savings, and expenses. So especially maybe it's the beginning of the year, if we have any adjustments to the salary, hopefully they got a raise, you can easily click into the particular card itself to make that adjustment. It's just a nice way to have that interactive space. Another thing, and this is going to be purely advisor facing, but the key thing with RightCapital is the customizability in terms of what your clients can view or interact with. And that's going to be particularly true when we're looking at Blueprint. For you as the advisor, you will see this edit button right here, which allows for you to select what you would like to include or exclude from the Blueprint visual. So for example, if there's something that we don't want to address here, or we don't want the client to view when they log in and access the Blueprint, you can deselect it from here. Same thing with the net worth and goals. You'll notice that that is also prevalent throughout each of the different sub-tabs. For example, in the net worth, maybe one of these accounts is closed. We don't want it to populate in the Blueprint visual. We can choose to just deselect it. And then when we access the net worth, it's going to be not visible. Same thing for the client's point of view. They would not see that visual right here included anymore. So this is a great way for you as the advisor to be extremely selective and refined in what you include in the visual itself. So you can fully control the narrative and the experience of the client when logging in and accessing things like the Blueprint and this key visual to summarize the current plan. Another key visual in the system can be found within the dashboard snapshot. Here under dashboard snapshot, this is going to be one of those unique spaces in RightCapital, as this pulls a lot of very invaluable information across the various modules of RightCapital all into one space. So we can address a lot of those high level things. It's also a great way to just be very selective too in terms of whether it's a PDF report, but if we are inviting a client to RightCapital and we wanted to only focus on a couple tabs, the snapshot is a great way to really focus on just a couple of those key visual aspects and those key visuals found throughout the different modules of RightCapital, looking at things like the property success, their liquidity analysis. We can also see that tax allocation summary. But one of the key things here is that instead of just normal notes, we're going to be using text boxes. So for the snapshot, you can also leverage text boxes. It's going to be just a little bit of a different format than our notes. The text box can be used for a multitude of things, whether it's going to be the note for the client or our actions items for the client. We can just change that header by clicking on the title, making that adjustment to the header, hitting save. And now this is going to be our action item for the client if we have them granted access to this. We can also include that calendar link so that they can easily use that to book time directly on the calendar if desired. And you can also fully customize what's included in here in terms of if you wanted to add additional text boxes, whether you wanted to add a full size, half size, or double size. And especially if you're talking about a more complex topic and maybe you wanted to leave them in-depth notes about their proposed path that you're going to be taking or just resources, the text box and the snapshot feature is a great way to have that information located here. Same thing with notes in general throughout the modules, but especially the snapshot can cover a lot of ground all in this one space and can have a lot of those key visuals. You can also add additional visuals by just clicking on the add item button. From here, there's a multitude of different things that can be addressed. And you can also reorder the flow of this particular visual conversation by just dragging and dropping these widgets or text boxes. And if there's something that's not relevant to the conversation, you can always click on the X mark to delete that particular widget. And then you can always add anything back if needed. So it's not deleted permanently, just purely not going to be there as we just deleted it. So completely customizable in terms of what can be covered in the snapshot, but the snapshot can also be a space to have that other form of open line of communication in terms of the key takeaways. And particularly if you are using this maybe in presentations or PDF reports, it can also be that familiar space for the clients as well, including their action items or maybe what you've talked about in your client meeting. Another key interactive space, and oftentimes a common question from clients, is going to be revolving around their cash flows. Within the retirement module of the client plan and under cash flows, there is going to be that nice, easy to digest visual that can really assist in painting the picture for the client in terms of where their money is coming from, what they're spending it on, and what is being saved. And that can be found within the maps section. Here under maps, we're going to be greeted with our waterfall visual, which is going to be that visual in terms of where our money is coming from, what expenses, tax payments, and savings contributions we're making, and what's happening with any excess cash flow. This is going to be targeting a specific year of the cash flow of whichever plan we have selected from this drop down. We can also toggle to a different year. So if there's a particular year that's going to be a very impactful year for their client plan, maybe they have questions, for example, about their retirement year in 2037, we can just use that slider feature to toggle to 2037. From there, we can then cover and see what is happening with our inflows and where that's flowing to in that particular year. So it's a great way to have that nice, easy to understand conversation about where our money's coming from, what are we saving into, and what's going on at the end of the year. We can change the visual format. So if we prefer a different aesthetic and maybe the client resonates with a different formatting of cash flows, you do have the option to view the breakdown. Under breakdown, we can see that similar information in terms of where our money's coming from. We can click on any of these drop downs to view additional insights and where it's flowing into. So for them, they are going to be selling their primary home. So it's an important aspect of their life when they retire. They're going to be downsizing at retirement. So we see those proceeds coming in. We see those outflows, including that down payment that they're making for their new home at retirement and what's happening for this particular year as well. So it's a great way to have an easy conversation or just that nice and easy to interact with visual of their money and where it's coming from and where it's going. So especially when they're navigating throughout the software, the cash flows maps can be that nice, easy to understand visual. Another key thing when we are talking about that customization ability in RightCapital, whether we're using templates for planning access for tasks and a couple other different facets of client engagement, if you are going to be leveraging tasks for your internal workflow, there is a way that you can further refine and alleviate what you might be doing repetitively as you start to create new clients. And that can be accomplished by going back to our advisor portal, going to client settings. From there, we can then go to client groups. And under client groups, this is where you can create client groups. So when we were looking back at templates and we had the option to assign a template to a client group, this is where we go to create those custom groups. So we can create custom titles for those groups. But the key thing here is the default for new clients, and when we create a new client, which client group they're going into. So for this situation, we're having those new clients go to the current client group. But the key thing here is that you do have the option to set default templates for new clients, which will alleviate some of your workflows and make it a little bit more of a refined process within RightCapital. We can do so by clicking on the edit button. From here, we can then assign default templates for new clients in regards to planning access templates, snapshot templates, also vaults templates, which you can create back in templates itself, and also default category templates. So that way, going forward, when we have a new client added into RightCapital, you will be able to see and have that all pre-selected for you. Of course, you can still make adjustments to the individual client once created, but it's just a nice way to have that kind of process already established and refined as you start to create those new clients in RightCapital.